Welcome to our discussion of Agile key terms, in which we'd like to touch on some buzzwords, some key topics, maybe make some points about Agile a little bit more clear. A lot of these terms can be confusing. We've got a lot of questions from people and requesting this video. We will discuss Kanban, we'll discuss Scrum, we'll discuss overall Agile principles and concepts. Let's start off with Kanban. And Kanban we highly recommend as a way to start with Agile. It's defined as card you can see. It initiates in manufacturing, specifically Japanese companies, and that's hence the term. The principle therein is to limit work in progress, effectively visually display the amount of work you're working on and keep it limited. And as we noted, we feel it's a great way to start with Agile, to understand the concepts and kind of get familiar with it. And ultimately, it's ideal for non-software projects, infrastructure, ERP projects, for example, a good way to transition from waterfall to Agile. The next Agile keyword you'll hear mentioned is Scrum. And Scrum is actually a framework, and it's the most common Agile framework that there is. In fact, when you hear people mention Agile, they're most commonly discussing Scrum. And that features the sprints, the structured ceremonies such as the stand-up, the sprint review, the sprint retrospective. And we recommend the Scrum framework for software projects because that's something in which you want to limit the amount of work in progress, have these structured check-ins and these demos. The term scrum actually comes from the sport of rugby, which is a situation in which the teams huddle together and attempt to get the ball, kind of like a kickoff in American football. And so that's the thing. You huddle together as a team. That's the scrum. We want to start getting into user stories in that discussion, but first we'd like to introduce a new Agile term to you, and that term is velocity. And I have asked this question to many Scrum Masters and Agile coaches that I recruit, and the one answer I got that I was somewhat amused by when I asked the question, what is velocity? And that was, the response was, it was the speed at which the team works, kind of like a cheetah moving fast to get things done. And that's not quite right. In Agile, the term velocity is used to refer to the progress of the team per sprint. And more specifically, velocity is the total number of story points completed in a sprint. And you use this number to track progress across sprints to look for improvement. Continuing our topic of user stories, let's now focus on story points. So what are story points? It's a form of task estimation that allows teams to relatively size efforts using relative estimation determined by the team to evaluate and determine what they can take on during a sprint. So we've introduced you to the concepts of story points and velocity, but now let's talk about the user story on which the other two depend. A user story is defined as a simple description of a piece of functionality, usually code or some other functionality for the project. And it's going to be told from the point of view of the person requesting the functionality. That is, the person that's going to be using it, not a manager or a boss. And then keynote is that it's truly not a replacement for detailed requirements documents. Worked on several complex software projects, SAP, ERP, you're going to need requirements documents such as technical and functional specs. Use the user story as a pointer to those more detailed documents. Talking details regarding user stories, let's first touch on the format. The format's really simple. Again, this is going to be a very general kind of a thing. So as a user role, so say it's a customer website user, I want type of functionality, very simple description of what you're after, what the person in that role is after, and what's the reason. So that reason for request. So we can get into more detailed specifics later, but that's really it. So as a user, I want what type of functionality for what specific reason. So to build the user stories, you really want the team to work together and define those personas, the person that's going to come up with that, and identify what the functionality is at a very, very high level so that it can be put in a user story and quickly added to the sprint and evaluated that way. So let's look at an example of a user story. It's very basic, but this is all you need. So as a website user, again, define from the perspective of the user who's wanting the functionality. We're going to ask for, I want a summary form with all my trade details, like what you'd see at a brokerage website such as E-Trade, TD Ameritrade, etc. And for what purpose? What's the reason for this request? So that I can quickly understand my overall position. Pretty simple. Again, so note this is a high-level requirement. This does not replace the complicated functional and technical specs that you will need to supplement this, but it's basic for putting on a board. Let's break now for a quick quiz. What is velocity? Velocity is the total number of story points that a team completes on average. And so with that, the average is key because we'd like to introduce a new term, which is capacity. Capacity relates to velocity in that whereas velocity is the average story point target, capacity is that average and then the availability of the project team taken into account when you plan out the sprint. So you want to make any adjustment to the plan work based on limited availability. Say someone's out for the full 2-week sprint. Let's don't include that in the plan capacity. Let's use that as an example to talk capacity. Looking at your normal velocity for the team is 21 points. But now with the one team member out for the full 2 weeks, we're going to bring that capacity down to 17 and plan the sprint accordingly. A few other Agile terms I really want you to know include epic, which corresponds more to a project like you would do in a waterfall, a real large scale effort. Feature, which is going to be multiple user stories all rolling up to one key piece of work. Acceptance criteria is the definition of what it takes to consider a user story done and the criteria by which is accepted by the business and moved along. It can't just be set to done arbitrarily without meeting that acceptance criteria. So those are terms you might hear. We're going to have more details on these in our user story video, so look for that. So thinking about an epic is a large effort like a waterfall project. I'll give you a simple example. Imagine you're doing a website. Each sprint might be a page, but the overall website is the full epic. So step by step moving towards that completion of that goal. Well, we've made it towards the end, so now it's time to summarize what we've discussed. First, we'll talk about the different Agile frameworks. As we noted, Scrum and Kanban are two of the most popular Agile frameworks. You will hear about others such as Scrumban and XP, things of that nature. But just note that Kanban is an easier way to start to transition from traditional project management to Agile, and Scrum is far more involved. So we again recommend you start with Kanban as you move into the Agile world. Now we'll talk about user stories, and these 4 topics and 4 terms have to do with user stories, the first of which is the definition of such. A user story, remember, is a summary requirement that's told from a user's perspective. It is not intended to take the place of detailed requirements such as functional specifications. Story points are the way that we estimate. It's relative in that you can use numbers, you can use hours, you can use days. It really comes down to what the team wants to do. And then velocity is the average total of story points that the team completes per sprint. Use this for estimating when you do your sprint planning so you know how much the team generally can complete. That takes us to the next term, which is capacity, which takes the velocity and then factors in potential changes in availability. A team member not available for a week of PTO, things of that nature will change the amount of story points that the team can complete based on the velocity, and then you will plan the sprint accordingly.
Thanks for watching our video. Please subscribe to our channel and join us next time.